as the one who has authority from the true and living God. It's a confrontation between two images of monarchy. The Greek gods, the Roman gods, in their little niches up on the cliff face, might be called upon to support the dominating rule of the kings and the Caesars, but the true and living God stands behind this liberating authority of Jesus, who is the Christ. "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," said Jesus, "for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And then Jesus goes on to speak in dazzling terms about the foundational role that Peter is going to have in Jesus' mission. "Neither the powers of death nor the gates of hell will prevail against it." In their joint product, this thing creating what he calls the church. "Surely," writes McLaren, "this Caesarville field trip has raised the disciples' hopes and expectations about Jesus to sky-high levels. But Jesus quickly brings them back down to earth. He strictly charged his disciples, "Tell no one that he is the Christ." They are not to use that royal title when they speak about him. So apparently Peter got the right answer, but Jesus immediately says that's not what his followers should be saying about him. There, in this politically charged setting, in one of Caesar's capital cities, Jesus knows that to claim him to be God's anointed Messiah, the long-awaited Savior, liberator, king, is to say Jesus is a son of God, like Alexander the Great, like Caesar Augustus, and it would do more harm to their movement than it would be of any help. Furthermore, Jesus says he's about ready to travel south to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Well, Peter responds probably as we would have, with shock, news like that. Denial. "God forbid, Lord, this will never happen to you." You feel Peter's confusion? Jesus has just said Peter gets it, right? Jesus indeed is the Christ. He's the liberating king. He is the revolutionary leader. He's been anointed and authorized by the living God to set the oppressed free. And if that's true, McLaren writes, the one thing Jesus cannot do is to be defeated. He has to conquer. He has to capture, not be conquered and be captured. He must kill his enemies, not be killed by them. So Peter corrects Jesus. Stop talking nonsense. This can never happen to you. At that moment, Jesus turns to Peter in one of the most dramatic cases of whiplash ever recorded in literature. "Get behind me, Satan," says Jesus. "You are a hindrance to me. You're not on the side of God, but of men." This is a stunning reversal, writes Brian McLaren. Jesus has just identified Peter as the blessed recipient of divine revelation, but now he just identifies Peter as the mouthpiece of the dark side. Jesus has just named Peter a foundational leader in a movement that will defeat the gates of hell, and now he claims Peter is working for the devil. Do you feel the agony of this moment? Like most of his countrymen, Peter believes that God will send a Messiah to lead an armed uprising to defeat and expel the occupying Roman regime, as well as all those who collaborate with it. But Jesus says no. That way of thinking is human. It is satanic, in fact. It's the very opposite of God's ways. Brian McLaren points out that since the beginning, Jesus has taught that the non-violent are the ones who will inherit the earth. Violence cannot defeat violence. Hate cannot defeat hate. Fear cannot defeat fear. God's ways are different. Now, this first field trip has shocked the disciples. They'd heard nothing like it before. They returned from Caesarea Philippi much less certain than they had been about what Jesus' mission was going to be. They are not to call him the Messiah. They are not to say that he's a son of God. Jesus points them instead toward his coming suffering in Jerusalem and his potential assassination. It's no wonder then that Jesus decides he's going to take 3 of his leading disciples with him on another field trip shortly thereafter. Maybe they need some remedial instruction about what the Messiah is really supposed to be and do. Matthew tells us it was only 6 days later that Jesus headed down to Mount Tabor to consult with 2 of the greatest characters of Old Testament history, Moses, the liberator, lawgiver, and Elijah, the prophet. Now, Moses is connected with Mount Sinai, where he got the 10 Commandments. You saw Charlton Heston in the movie, I'm sure. Elijah is associated with Mount Carmel, where he defeated the priests of Baal in a violent uprising against King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. If Jesus had gone to either of those 2 very famous mountains, he would have gotten only half of the advice that he was seeking. He would either have gotten it from the perspective of the law, that is from Moses, or from the prophet's perspective, from Elijah. He could have taken his 3 disciples to Mount Zion, of course, if he wanted to consult with royal advice from King David or King Solomon. Or he could have taken them to Mount Scopus, where Herod's temple stood in Jerusalem, if he wanted a priestly perspective on what he was supposed to do as Messiah. But Jesus chose a neutral place, a pretty much unknown place. As I said, the Israeli Tourism Board doesn't even take tours there. He chose Mount Tabor. Singular hill. You hardly see it in the mist here. Just one singular hill. Not far from, it's in the valley of Jezreel, not far from the border between Galilee and Samaria. And the hill looks like a bump within the plain of Esdraelon. Just a bump. There's no other mountain or hill anywhere nearby it. The Hebrew word tabur means belly button. And it's like an outie, not an innie. Local tradition held that this site is where Earth's umbilical cord was removed when it was created by God. Mount Tabor, in effect, was seen as the center of the world. And Brian McLaren says of this second field trip, they went to the top of a mountain, and there they had a vision of Jesus shining in glory, conversing with 2 of the greatest leaders of Hebrew Jewish history. And again, Peter was bold to speak up. He offered to make 3 shrines to the 3 great men, perhaps like they had seen in the alcoves and the niches to the other gods that was there at Caesarea Philippi. McLaren says Peter was elevating Jesus to the same elite level as the great liberator, lawgiver Moses, the great prophet Elijah. This time it was God's own voice that rebuked Peter. As if to say, Moses, Elijah, they were fine for their time. But this is my beloved Son, Jesus. And he's on another level entirely. He's revealing my true heart in a unique and unprecedented way. So Peter, listen to him. Brian McLaren points out that Moses, the lawgiver, and Elijah, the prophet, great as they were, differed from Jesus in one important way. They had both engaged in violence and bloodshed in God's name. But Jesus, in God's name, would receive violence. This truly was unprecedented. In Jewish thought, to undergo violence without retaliation, without an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. And that's why as they came down the mountain, Jesus once again spoke about death and resurrection. Well, Brian McLaren concludes his chapter by saying, in many ways, we are all like Peter. We speak with great insight at 1 minute, and then we make complete fools of ourselves the next. We are clueless about how many of our pious and popular assumptions are actually illusions. We don't know how little we know. We have no idea how many of our ideas are wrong. Like Peter, We may use the right words to describe Jesus. Well, we use words like Messiah, Lord, the Christ, Son of the living God, but without even understanding his heart and his wisdom and his way. But that's okay. Peter was still learning, and so are we all. After all, life with Jesus is one big field trip, and we're taking it together. So let's keep walking. Amen.